Blessed be everyone. Welcome to another Mystery Witch School YouTube live stream. Today we're talking about who can be a witch, and so that should be an interesting and fun subject. Hi, Stephanie. There, I see that you said that there's a tornado happening where you are. So that doesn't sound too good. Uh, yeah, it sounds a bit scary, actually. So what I'll do while I'm waiting for people to come on to the live, because it takes a little bit of time for notifications to go out, I just want to welcome you all for watching the replay. And if you are new to the Mystery Witch School channel, welcome to Mystery Witch School. There are heaps of videos on this channel now on all topics related to Wicca and witchcraft, shadow work and tarot. I also have videos on various different types of spells, making different sorts of oils or oil combinations for spells. I don't actually make my own oils from scratch. I buy the essential oils, but combining them anyway, and all sorts of things that are basically witchcraft from a traditional, very practical approach, and also as a spiritual path as well. So a path where we can walk feeling connected to our true selves, feeling connected to that part of ourselves that we know is beyond the physical, and really working with trying to bring more joy and connection into our life through connecting with nature, with the elements, with the herbs, with the candles when we're doing magic, with deities, for those of you who practice with deities, and through ritual and celebration. All of those things that just help us disconnect ourselves from the hustle and bustle of the crazy, mundane, workaday world out there, and to bring us home to who we truly are, and to make us lead a life where we are becoming more and more conscious of our true being, because that's, I think, what a lot of us are wanting right now. We're wanting to feel connected to who we truly are. We know deep down inside that the world could be a very different place if we could all connect to our true essence on that more higher conscious level, that we could connect to the abundance that we have available to us through magic, through understanding that we have the right to have the things that we want to have, so that we can create what we came here to create on this planet. I really believe we came here to create in some way, and also to come here for an experience of what it's like to be in this simulation, this 3D world that we live in. And at times, things have gone amiss, and we've sort of ended up in situations where we've been, probably for the last few thousand years, where we've just lost touch really with who we really are and what we really came here to do. And there's been a lot of misleading and about spirituality and so forth. So coming back to the craft, coming back to witchcraft, is a way of coming back to our roots, in a way, coming back to that connection with nature. And the shadow work side of it is really just coming back to ourselves and learning about who we are again. It's not about trying to be better people. It's about trying to find the people we really are underneath all of the ego masks and protective mechanisms that we have to keep us safe in the world. So, hello, Swak fan. Okay, didn't see any spinning supersedies. Okay. So I'm gathering the tornado has happened now, so it's hopefully it's over and everything's still standing. So today's topic is about who can be a witch. And this is kind of a interesting topic, because I've heard from various different people, so I've experienced it myself, where we're told, what a witch is. There's stereotypes, of course, uh, that people still adhere to. I know that there are still people in the world who don't even believe that witches exist, who still believe that we're part of the fairy tales and the myths. And so when they think of a witch, they're thinking of the Wicked Witch from the West in or the East and West, I think, in Wizard of Oz, or the witches in various different fairy tales, and they don't believe that witches even exist, and when they find out, they sort of just believe that we're somehow in make-believe land pretending that we're witches. So there's still those people there, and they still exist. But there's also people who are involved in witchcraft, or maybe they're not actually practicing, they're more armchair occultists, or armchair people who dabble in the occult or dabble in maybe paganism, who like to read things about these things, but they don't necessarily practice, who would have these, clear definitions of what a witch is and what isn't a witch. We also have the word witch itself having had a really negative reputation, and then still some places still having a very negative reputation, where people don't want to use the word just simply because it just doesn't feel safe to use the word. And that can make things a little bit confusing, because people will then choose other words to describe what it is that we do. And when we think about witchcraft or any activity, anything we're engaged in, we often like to label ourselves as the thing itself. So a witch practices witchcraft, a dancer dances, a runner runs, a singer sings, and we sort of become identified with actually being the thing that we're doing. And I often wonder whether that is, on one hand, it's useful to help with communication and describing what somebody does or talking about things. But on the other hand, we can just get too attached to these labels and end up creating more sub labels until we sort of get to the point where, if you don't have this one defining factor, that means you're no longer belonging to that label anymore. And so it can get that way with humans in general. When it comes to the craft or witchcraft, generally speaking, if you look at witchcraft throughout history, if you look at it throughout different cultures, it's pretty expansive in what witches do. But the thing that seems to be everyone has in common is that we have this belief in magic. We have this belief that we have the ability to have an influence on ourselves and the world around us. We have an influence over what happens to us to a certain degree. And so that is something we all share. We all share that belief. And even within a Wiccan context, where you have a particular type of witchcraft, which is Wicca, there are definitely Wiccans out there who don't practice magic, but they still believe in magic. So it's a general belief that magic exists. Most witches practice magic, though. There's also that connection to nature that all witches share too, that we use the tools of nature. We work with the herbs, we connect with the animals, we connect with the plants, we communicate with them. And the non 3D reality, or what we would term 3D reality at this stage anyway, like with the different elemental spirits, earth spirits, nature spirits, deities, working with other spiritual forces. Not all witches believe in deities, so that is also something that not all witches share, but we do share a connection to the other world, if you want to use that term, other, just to describe it uh, as something that we don't normally see around us, or most people aren't in awareness of. So what that unites us to, as I guess a group, is that we have that connection to the spirit world, and often we'll work with the spirit world as well. And that connection to nature, working with herbs to connect with our spell crafting and to work acts of magic, working with animals for messages and information as guides, and the same with plant spirit guides as well. Working with the elements, being able to influence elementally as well, is another connection that we have with nature as witches. And if you look at the different things that, say, magicians do, or shamans do, or people, or wizards, or whatever name, or sorcerers, we're all pretty much doing the same thing. We might do it slightly differently, particularly with magicians, tend to be a little bit more on the intellectual side, tends to be a bit more heady. They might work more ceremoniously with various spirits, and maybe not so necessarily as earth-based or as earthy as witches do, but there's crossovers there. Anyway, so it is hard to sort of pin down what a witch is. I think the only thing you could really say is there's a belief of magic and most likely a practicing of magic too in some way. And it's a choice to, we use the term witch, or we can use another term if witch doesn't feel good. So there's a bit of choice there in the terminology that we use. So I'm just going to go into the comments now. Um, Blessed be Earth Singer 100. Miss BO891, 2005, was overseas and went into a shop run by a witch. She told me that not just anybody could be born a witch, that you needed to have talent and that you also needed to be born a psychic. That is something, I wanted to talk about as well today. So that's a good example of definitions of witches. And it's probably, if you look traditionally, it's probably that's how a witch or a shaman would have got their job, because they did show that they were particularly psychic and particularly connected to the other world, perhaps naturally more inclined than other people. So they would have been most likely the witches or the shamans. And so that was definitely has been an aspect traditionally. But times change. And we change. And I feel that as we become more consciously aware of who and what we are, a lot of people can develop their psychic gifts and can develop those talents. And we can have the means and the knowledge and the time to do that in this day and age, whereas perhaps in the past, people weren't so focused on that. Okay, my grandparents used the term medicine man and woman because deeply baked in the hard-nosed Christianity in the area we lived. Yep, I can understand that. If the atmosphere is energized after a thunderstorm, it's also after a tornado. It absolutely, any act of nature that is intense will certainly be activated for sure. And look, if you want to do some really powerful magic, it's probably a really good time to do it, which is kind of probably not easy to focus when you're in the midst of something that can be that catastrophic. It is actually, there's a lot of power that you can harness for a spell in that kind of a situation. So if you want to harness some of that energy if it's still lingering around. Okay, was Aleister Crowley a witch or a ceremonial magician? He was quite a lot of things, but I would probably say he's more a magician because of he just practiced more within that genre of magic. So think of things as genres too. That witchcraft is there's lots of different genres within witchcraft, and witchcraft is kind of a genre of magical practitioner. And whilst Crowley probably did practice witchcraft in more the traditional sense, I think most of his work was more ceremonial magic. Unlike a dancer, a singer, a witch, Wiccan, or anyone in the pagan world is not readily acceptable because of the religious leaders or those that are not familiar with our way of being. Absolutely. Okay, yeah. Hello, Moira. Okay, I work in aged care, and often I will dream of a resident passing, and then that particular resident will actually pass away a day or two later. So it's quite eerie. Yeah, and that's something that we kind of as witches have to just normalize, I guess, because we do, and even the practice, the more that you practice the craft and the more that you practice meditation, the more that you practice working with energy work, the more you practice with going and working with ritual and doing spells, the more attuned you get to the that there's more than what we see, and so it does start to open you up to being a little bit more extrasensory, and through those practices, you can become more extrasensory. Not everybody is a gifted psychic or born a gifted psychic, and some people have to develop the skill. Other people are gifted in other ways. Some people are really good at magic and really good on that projective side of working, and but not that great at receiving information from the other world. But magic is also a part of the craft, and so particularly in this day and age, we're working with magic as well. So I would say we have to look at the times and how things change. And whilst traditionally, yes, witches probably were more psychic, they probably worked more with the spirit world, a lot more than a lot of modern Wiccans or witches do in the West anyway. Times have changed. And if we want witchcraft to be something that's more acceptable, if we want witchcraft to be something that people aren't afraid of, if we want to dispel all of the myths that some of those religious groups like to spread about us, then we have to also be accepting of the fact that in this day and age, there may be some witches that specialize in different areas, not so much in mediumship or that they might specialize more in other areas. When sort of Wicca came into being, it sort of spiritualized witchcraft and sort of took it away from being more of a folk tradition that could sort of belong to any religion. So you could be a Christian and still practice witchcraft. You could be any religion and still practice the witchcraft side of things. And there are Christian witches out there. So in our modern day and age with Wicca, it kind of like took it into being a religion in and of itself, and gave it, I think in the West anyway, it gave it, it was going to attempt to try and lift it up out of that realm of being negative and being seen as being something really bad. And, whether you agree with it or not, whatever your feelings might be about Wicca or what it's become, or even what it was originally, it did lift it up and it did bring it out into being a little bit more normalized, being more accepted in various places, depending on where you live. And it was helpful, I think, in doing its job. But like anything, what happens is that we humans tend to the ego likes to grab things and try to pin it down and define it and narrow it and then limit who can participate in it. And that has happened with Wicca. And sometimes I think it's also happened with witchcraft as well. Okay, follow up with what I said. That's been what I've noticed here in my community, unfortunately. So that you were talking about the 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 religious leaders. Yeah, I know that there's still some places, even in Australia, some of the country towns that probably wouldn't be as open minded as the city areas are. And I definitely know that in the US, there are still a lot of places that are very hardcore Christian, in the sense of more fundamentalist Christian in the way that they interpret things, and that would make it very difficult indeed. My grandfather told my aunt when she was a child that in our family we'd hear, see, and do things. For some reason, he didn't spread the memo to his grandchildren. Okay. So you know now. Yeah, my if you look back at your grandparents or great-grandparents, you might find that they did do practices that were a little traditionally witchy, like try to stop storms with crossing 2 candles together, things like that. They might have worked more with herbs, medicinally too, or had what we'd call superstitions about things, uh, that actually have their roots more in more traditional witchy beliefs and witchy practices. But what I've heard over the years in regards to not just Wicca, I mean, Wicca's got a lot more limitations because it's been sort of institutionalized now, not completely institutionalized, but there are Wiccan institutions now. And the reason behind institutionalizing it as a religion is so that it can have more funding, I guess, as a non-profit organization, not having to pay taxes. It is easier to be able to bring things out and do things when you've got financial funding behind you, which isn't a bad thing. But the problem with institutionalizing anything is that it ends up becoming exclusive to having to tick certain boxes. And if you don't tick those boxes, then you can't be part of that exclusivity. And while I think every group has a right to be exclusive in whatever way the particular group wants to be as a whole, when it comes to a religion that came from where it came from, if you look at the history of it, where Gerald Gardner kind of put it together from his experiences, it wasn't an institutionalized religion to begin with. It was pretty open. And the history of witchcraft itself is pretty open there. It's really dependent on the culture and the background and of the people, and it would have changed as people changed. And as people invaded each other and as all of that history of what people do, things change. So institutionalizing it, whilst there's definitely positives there, there's also negatives in the sense that you have to tick all the boxes. When I was in my second coven, and this was still back in the 90s, we were approached by a Wiccan institution over in Perth, and they wanted to set up a branch here in Brisbane. And so we were approached to be that inner circle that would set it up here. And so the high priestess came over from Perth to Brisbane for maybe a month or something and spent time with us. And so we got to sort of see a lot about how that institution operated. Uh, they had forms you had to fill out if you wanted to join. They had like an inner circle and an outer circle. There were rules around who could wear purple. um, I just remember that because I thought that's really weird. And there were it was really following kind of like this hierarchical thing, which is kind of what paganism was kind of going against in a way when it was sort of first started. And so after spending a month with that and seeing the types of rituals that she did, it sort of reminded me, honestly, the rituals reminded me of a born again Christian church meeting with, it was just so, it really was like that. If anyone's ever been to a born again Christian or heard them, I used to live across the road from them. So I heard their singing and I used to see them through the window. Uh, it was a bit like that. And so we opted out. We said, no, I don't think this is really our cup of tea. It's kind of not really what we perceive Wicca as being for ourselves or what we've experienced it as. So we rejected the invitation. But that was my experience at the time. And this is going back over 30 years. So it may have changed. Uh, but it's a case of you having to be certain things to fit that criteria. Whereas a witch, you should be able to be a solitary witch, and the same with Wicca as well. You should be able to practice Wicca as a solitary. There was back in the 90s and the 80s, you could be a solitary practitioner. There were books written for solitary practitioners to help you if you couldn't find a coven to have community with. And I knew Wiccans, they call themselves Wiccans, who were solitaries, and they used to come and join us sometimes just to have a bit of community at the Sabbats. And sometimes we would actually go and do a Sabbat in their circle because they had a circle in their on their property. And so we would just share resources. And they were still solitaries and they were still welcome. And there was none of this, you can't do this and you can't do that. People worked together to do what we could do together. And even though there were differences in the way that they worked with their circle work and the way that we worked with our circle work, we still came together and to share resources and to have a sense of community together. But what I hear these days is some very interesting things, and I am going to go and list them now after I check in with more of the comments. Okay. Her Gerald Gardner was a friend of Aleister Crowley, and they were together in the Golden Dawn. Is this true? Gerald Gardner was never part of the Golden Dawn, and I think he wanted to he never I think he was if I'm trying to remember back to the biography of him, uh, I think he wanted to work for Aleister Crowley. I'm not know if I'm getting him mixed up with Indra Shah. Um, but he never he took a lot from Aleister Crowley. Yes, he was influenced by Aleister Crowley. He was a Freemason or a co-Mason, and a lot of his influences come from more Masonry than the Golden Dawn, but he was influenced also by Crowley. So there was a connection between the 2, and a lot of the Wiccan form does come from the Golden Dawn, which was and from Crowley, and from Freemasonry. A lot of the Golden Dawn stuff come from Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism anyway, so that's why you've got the 3 degrees in Gardnerian. That comes directly from Freemasonry. But I'd have to go back and look at those writings because I think that maybe he went to work for Crowley as a secretary, um, but he got frustrated because Crowley wouldn't teach him or something. I can't remember if that was him or someone else. The Hierophant card comes to mind when considering some of these issues. Yeah, traditions, absolutely, traditions and structures, and they have their place. They do have their place, so I'm not saying you shouldn't have institutionalization. I think it's good to have a mixture of options for people because some people thrive in institutional situations. They thrive in a hierarchy. They thrive when they've got a set structure. Because some people are structural thinkers. They like to have structure to learn, and we do learn better structurally anyway. But some people really like to have that structure there, and other people like to have less structure and a little bit more freedom in the way that or flexibility in the way that they do things. And so that's why I think it's important to have more options than just one set option. The one thing that I've always found interesting about how hard on Wiccan and witchcraft practices and how the Sabbaths and Esbats are of the devil or whatever, but they are included. Um, yeah, historically, I guess they called it the witches' Sabbath when they wrote about all of these diabolical things witches were supposed to have done in the medieval times. And the fundamentalist Christians do make up a lot about what we're supposed to do at those Sabbaths. And maybe there are definitely some groups of people who do practice things like that, and they do call themselves witches. So it's not saying that that doesn't happen. It's just simply saying that we're all kind of, as far as they're concerned anyway, we're all the same to them. They don't understand the differences between the different types of practices, and that we don't. Most of us don't actually practice that way. Aleister Crowley has had a lot of bad press. However, I think he really was a brilliant man in many ways. He was. He was quite a genius in many ways. And although, I mean, his upbringing, if you look at his history, his upbringing was pretty intense, fundamentalist, crazy Christian. So, and he was, I think, by nature, or he was kind of brought up, I guess. He was a narcissist, so let's face it, he was narcissistic, and probably not somebody you'd really want to work with. But he did bring a lot of brilliance, and his writing, his poetry, was it's just some of his poetry is beautiful, like really beautiful, and he did really have an understanding of ritual too. So he did bring a lot of great value to the magical world, even if he did go down a path that kind of was quite reckless. uh, Maybe because of that was where some of that brilliance was able to come out of. Some things into the services, the Easter hunt or Halloween. Uh, yes. So Christianity did adopt a lot of pagan practices. Absolutely. So some of the myths that I've heard about being a witch is that yes, you can't be a witch unless you are psychic, like particularly psychic. Maybe you've seen spirits your whole life, that you can talk to spirits. That you're so good at divination that you don't even need to use a scrying bowl or cards, or that if you do come to using some form of divination tool, you're just naturally good at it. You haven't had to learn how to do it. You haven't had to practice doing it. You haven't had to develop it. You've just got a natural affinity for it. So therefore, you're a witch, right? There's other, I guess, misconceptions too, that you have to, particularly in this day and age, that you have to believe in deities to be a witch, and that's not true either. To be a witch is, there are traditional witches that don't believe in deity at all. I've met them. They will still work with spirits, but they don't sort of work with gods and goddesses, in that way that polytheistic versions of witchcraft, or the way that Wicca works. You don't even need to be polytheistic to be a witch. You can be monotheistic and be a witch, okay? Uh, as I said, there's Christian witches there. There's witches in all different religions. Witchcraft's existed in all religions when you go into them. There's some beliefs that you have to wear black all the time. That's kind of more of a fashion thing that, I guess, sort of came out of like sort of the Gothic era, and that you have to wear a lot of makeup, that you have to be female, or that you have to be biologically female is another misconception. There are transgender witches out there are male witches out there, and still using the term witch, and still quite rightly using the term witch. And even within Wiccan situations, as I said, okay, I was in covens back in the 90s. Uh, It was pretty open, it didn't really matter what you identified as. It was pretty much if you were suitable, if you worked well with the group, as in personality, from a personality point of view, and from an ethical point of view, you got on with everybody, everybody looked after each other, and you shared the similar beliefs, or the fundamental ones anyway, of working with magic and working with ritual and all of that, then pretty much you were part of the coven. So it wasn't kind of this thing that was exclusive, and putting, like, saying that certain types of people couldn't be part of it. I understand that since as times have progressed, there are groups that prefer to be more exclusive and exclude other people for different reasons, and every group has the right to do that as a group. But to actually say that the Wicca or witchcraft as a whole is like that, which some people say, like you can't be a witch unless you're vegan, or you can't be a witch, unless you are a certain, like, unless you're female, for example. Those things are just not true. So it's simply a matter of knowing that, and trying to find, if you want a group, to find a group that isn't so limited, I guess, in the sorts of people that they want to work with. Personally, I feel that for me, witchcraft is a spiritual path. It's not just about magic. It's not just about um, working within that very limited 3D reality. It's not an ego thing, okay, for me. It's not about trying to manipulate the world all of the time. It is a practice of going within and discovering who we really are, really uncovering and getting rid of all that ego crap that makes us believe that we have to be a certain thing or a certain way, um, in order to be acceptable as a human being. To me, it's about having that connection to your truth, to the truth, from a spiritual point of view, and as a result of discovering your more conscious self, you become more a compassionate person, more of an open person, more accepting person. you start to bring in a lot more joy and peace into your lives and attract more people who are more positive and open and loving and compassionate as well. And if people want to follow that path, if people want that, if people want to discover who they truly are, if people really are sincerely on the path to discovering their true spiritual selves, then how can you exclude anybody from doing that? Just because they don't dress a certain way or eat a certain way or whatever. To me, that doesn't make sense. And from a mystical point of view, that's always been the crux of mysticism. The mystical paths from or aspects of all religions have always maintained that openness to, and this is one of the reasons why they were often vilified, why they were often even persecuted, was because they had much more of an accepting attitude to true, sincere spiritual seekers. And even if those true, sincere spiritual seekers didn't tick all of the boxes that the established religion or the institutionalized religions thought they should, they would still often be welcome in a more of the mystical traditions, because the whole point of the mystical path is that it's the individual's journey towards the truth of who they are. And that's something everybody really has the right to experience and explore. Not everybody is at the same level, though. There comes a time where you have to be at a certain level of consciousness before you can really benefit from the practices, and also to be able to be part of a group too. So if some people are still so caught up in their ego that they're quite narcissistic and destructive, then obviously they're not necessarily at that point where they're really ready to go on that spiritual journey yet. But a lot of people are ready to go on that journey and want to go on that journey and want to go feel that connection to nature, feel that connection to deities, feel that connection to the Wiccan form, even the rituals, the Sabbats, all of those things, and want to explore who they are through that form, because that's all Wicca is, or any of the different brands of witchcraft. They're just a form, right? They're a container, they're a vase. It's what's in them that's the juice, the essence. It's not the vase. The vase is just the pretty thing on the outside, and it's a structure that holds something together, and it's useful. To do that, obviously, you can't put flowers. You need the vase to put the flowers in. But it's the flowers that you're actually really wanting, and it's the flowers that have the teaching, it's the flowers that have the essence, the scent of the rose. It's not the vase. The vase is just there to give you some form and some structure to work within, and to contain the practices so that you have something to hold on to walk the journey. But as you progress along the spiritual path, the form can change to accommodate the change within the essence. So if you look at different vases, for example, you may have different vases for different flower arrangements. So you can sort of think of it that way. The form, the rituals that we do, the ceremonies that we do, even the degree system that some Wiccan groups still adhere to and use, are all a form. And they are there solely to contain the essence of the teachings, and it's the essence that actually helps us grow. The form can change, and whilst we need it to help us psychologically create space, so for ritual, that psychological ability to create sacred space for ourselves, to connect us to ourselves, to transition from mundane, everyday hustle and bustle to being more centered into who we are. The form is good for that, and we need the form. But when we're addicted to the form and we think that the vase is the thing, we're running around with an empty vase. And a lot of religious groups, including pagan groups, are running around with empty vases thinking that the vase is the thing. And there's nothing in the vase. It's an empty vase. It's a form. It looks great. It might be fun. It might sound great. They might have all the bells and whistles. They might have all of the outfits and all of the music and the songs, but not necessarily actually have anything in the vase that's actually going to help um, anyone really connect with themselves. So that's the truth of it, and that is how it is. And all the mystical traditions from around the world, if you go into the esoteric sides of Buddhism or Hinduism, of Sufism, you go into those things, you find that that's what they're about. They're about what goes in the vase. Uh, the vase itself is just there to help contain it. So if you want to be a witch, it's just simply a matter of connecting to what witches do, connecting to nature, working with the herbs, enjoying learning about witchcraft and applying what you learn about witchcraft to your daily practices. That will make you a witch because you're applying what witches do into your life, the same as a singer will apply the singing into their life. A dancer will put dancing into their life. A runner will put running into their life. And so it's the same with witchcraft. If you're practicing it, if you're doing it, then you are a witch, essentially. So it's a matter of doing the practices of whether it's spell crafting, whether you're incorporating other development practices like meditation, like energy work, working with self development tools like doing shadow work. All of these things are how you apply the doing side to your life. And that's what makes you a witch. It's what you do. And that's essentially what it is in a nutshell. If you're practicing Buddhism, you're a Buddhist. If you're practicing witchcraft, you're a witch. So it doesn't matter how you dress. It doesn't matter what you eat. It doesn't matter what you identify as. If you're practicing witchcraft, you're a witch. So that is essentially what it all boils down to. And that is, I think, one of the most difficult things for people to do is actually practice. It's not easy to know how to practice. Back in the old days, you would have had somebody to learn from. Even in the 70s, you probably would have found maybe a coven to learn from. And yes, it is great to learn from other people. I'm so fortunate that I found, very first time, the very first coven I found was just perfect. It was a training coven, so that's what they specialized in, training people. They were really great leaders, the high priest and high priestess. They made a really good team, and the people in the coven were really, really good people. And it was because of the leadership of Brian and Canaz that created that group at the time to be a really great coven. So I was very fortunate that I found a good group of people to begin with. And it helped me a lot having experience from other people and also the other people that came into or were around the coven as well. The solitaries that used to come and work with us, that was Amber and Jack. And we also had collaborations with one of the Druid groups, and we would share resources basically. And that was just really, really wonderful. And a lot of people would love to have that. But I know in some places it's not possible to be out about what it is that you do. So that's one of the reasons why Mystery Witch School is here. It is to basically give some kind of community, even if it is online, to those who don't necessarily have a community to be a part of. That's why I created the Mystery Witch School Academy. So that was to provide people with an opportunity to learn witchcraft in a more structured environment, which is how I learned it. So even though our coven wasn't steeped in any institutionalized form, we still had a structure to learning because the way that we learn is helpful if we can scaffold how we learn so that we can learn in from, we start here and then we add to this and we add and we add and we add. And as we add, we grow more knowledge and more experience. So the learning experience is one of adding to what it is that we already know and practicing all of those things as we go until we reach a certain period and we look back and we can see how much we've learned. But it is a slow process. And that's why the Mystery Witch School 101 Academy is a 12-month course. It's also why I drip feed it so that the little fast bunnies who want to run ahead and go from module to module to module and gorge on the information but not necessarily practice have to slow down. And for people who are particularly slow, well, then you've got as much time as you need. You can take 2 years to do the course or 3 years to do the course. The course is there for as long as the course is there. um, but I do it in 12 over a 12-month period because that is how I learned. And also because I structure it so that you're practicing every month. You've got something to practice every month. Then you're building on the skills from a practical point of view rather than just getting head knowledge and not acting on it or not knowing how to act on it or not being able to incorporate that head knowledge into an actual practice. And it's surprising how simple it has to be to start off. You don't need to be doing a lot to start off. You just need to get into the habit of practicing something, turning up for yourself every day and applying yourself to that practice. It doesn't have to be a big time consuming thing. It's not like you've got to get a university degree in Wicca. It's it's simply putting it into your life the way that your life is so that you can then enhance your life through the practices. So that's why the Mystery Witch School 101 Academy exists and is structured the way that it's structured. So if you want to know more about how you can join the Mystery Witch School Academy, the link is in the description field below the video. And, I probably should put it in that as well, although I didn't, think to do that earlier, because it is a really good way to actually practice. I do teach a form of Wicca, but it's incredibly eclectic. It's not, it comes from my own training, I guess, plus also my experience from having been a part of other mystical groups too, which I found personally really helpful to my practice and also missing from the witchcraft training that I had back in my coven days. So I've just put the link in the chat if you want to have a look at the Mystery Witch School 101 Academy. Okay, back to the comments. Okay, I'm going to go up a bit because there was a lot of comments that just came in. Yeah, some religions incorporated pagan practices into their practices. Yeah, and some of them they're how evil they are now, they've discovered that they're pagan practices. I've heard that too. I've heard that too. That's probably more of the fundamentalist, Christian, Protestant type religions. I don't think you could get the Catholics to walk away from paganism because there's paganism so rooted in Catholicism. Um What do you think about some people who wear items that represent a deity or Wiccan or witchy symbol, but they don't know what it is, they're wearing, other than it looks cool or they want to look goth? I guess you could sort of say that it could be just seen as disrespectful. I don't really have a problem with it myself. I mean, there's a reason why they've connected with it. Even if it is their ego just connecting with it, thinking that looks cool or, this is what goths wear. Goths also wear crucifixes too. So does that mean they're Christians? I think that when it comes to what we wear, I take a Buddhist attitude, I guess, which is the there's an attraction to it for a reason. And if they look deeply into what the attraction was, then that might be something that's very interesting for them. Because a lot of people wear mala beads, the mala bracelets and mala beads who aren't necessarily Buddhist practitioners. They kind of wear them because they look kind of hippie and cool. And I know that from a Buddhist point of view, there's no concern there because it's a very open way of seeing spirituality. And I like to take that point of view that they have, which is on some level they're connecting to what that symbol represents, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. So if they're wearing, like, say, Hecate's key or something because they think it looks, cool and goth because they've heard that, Hecate is this dark goddess and, wow, that's really cool. um, they're actually connecting to Hecate, so it's not necessarily a bad thing to connect. Uh, what some people fail to realize is that there is no gatekeepers, only those that want to capitalize on the weak-minded. Yeah, exactly, exactly. The gatekeepers are more on the spiritual side of things, I guess. Um, it's the From a human perspective, it's it's really about the student being ready. If you ever saw the movie Doctor Strange, it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, even the modern version is where he was sort of still in his very much his ego, entitled kind of belief. So he was a surgeon. He'd had an accident. He couldn't use his hands anymore, and so he heard that there was this great healer or this great way of being able to heal. And so he went over, I think, to India or somewhere to meet this great sage and to learn how to basically have the ability to heal his hands from an energetic point of view. And he quite arrogantly sort of went over there. He met the teacher, the woman who was the teacher. And because he was still in his arrogance and still in his own ego of entitlement, they kicked him out and said, "You're not ready for this yet." And so he spent hours and hours and hours just sitting outside the door, waiting and waiting and waiting. It was like, "No, I'm not leaving. I'm not going away." And because he should have showed this determinism, it was in a way, it's a bit like a test, I guess. He ended up it being accepted back in again and then had to go through all of the rigors and all of the training. So it's kind of a case of you gotta leave your ego behind in a way, or try to leave as much of the ego behind as we can. I mean, we're always going to take the ego with us, but we have to learn that this isn't an ego trip. This is actually trying to bring the higher self, the more conscious self, into leadership of the ego, so that the ego becomes the servant of the higher self and not the ruler. It's like if you have a dog, you don't want the dog leading you. You don't want the dog being the boss, particularly if it's a large dog. You have to be, if you're a dog owner, you have to be the boss of the dog because that's the way dogs work. They're always looking for leadership. And it's the same with the ego. The ego is actually looking for leadership, but it thinks it's the leader, and it's the higher self or the more conscious, um, observing self that actually is the one that should be running the show. And the ego is just there to keep you safe. It's to stop you from walking out in front of a bus. It's to make sure you're well fed. It's just to do those things of keeping you alive. I saw a meme once that said, for all the hatred there is from Christians to Wiccans and pagans, they sure stole a lot of our holidays. They certainly did. And it's not only Christianity that's done that to pagans, other religions have done that too. And then incorporated it into their own yearly ceremony and bash the pagans when they're doing exactly the same thing the pagans did every year. So it's not just Christianity. Two witches I think are amazing. Janet and Stuart Farrar, yeah, yes, absolutely. The authors of those numerous books, and I think it would have been amazing to have been a part of their group. Yes, absolutely. They are Alexandrian, um, so they come from the Alexandrian tradition, which is very similar to the tradition that I came through with my first coven. So I can relate very well to their work because that was my background too. So they are, yeah. The Witch's Bible is a really. Um, I'm just making sure I've got the right authors on that. To it. Oh, yeah, I just read that. LOL. I am one of those fast people who would fly through all the modules, but I know I need to do just that one module each month and take my time to practice. Yeah, and that's just how you learn. And you can always still read the books. Like it's not a saying that you can't still read and learn from a head perspective. It is a slowing down and doing thing, I'm afraid. It is like learning to sing or learning to play an instrument or learning to dance. You do actually have to start the beginning and build the strength and the endurance and the brain's connection to the body and all of that. Eclectic is the balance. Streaming 47 minutes ago. Created a few videos over the years. Yes. The alpha cat. I'm the alpha cat. My cats think I walk on water. My cat thinks that I control the weather. She does when it's raining, especially if it's been raining for a while because she loves being outdoors. She complains to me about the weather, and it's almost like I feel she's telling me to make it stop. And yes, I think that at times I have been able to influence the weather, but, not to the extent she wants me to. Okay, everybody, so that's all I wanted to say really about who can be a witch, is anybody who practices witchcraft. If you're practicing it, then you're doing it. And there's really, in this modern day and age, it's really about being a practitioner of what it is that you do. You're probably not a witch if you're just reading about it and not doing it. You're more of a witchcraft enthusiast or a witchcraft appreciator, but not actually a witch. You're a violinist because you play violin. You know, you're a guitarist because you play the guitar. And that's how I sort of feel about witchcraft. And it's not easy to find groups because groups of people do like to resonate with each other and whatever it is that they might be into as a group. And so I don't have any problems with groups being particular about who joins them and who doesn't. I think every group has the right to do that. um, it's a case of just trying to find a group that you resonate with and who has, I guess, the similar principles and ethics that you have as well, which may not be easy to find. Okay, so but remember, Mystery Witch School is here, and I do have the training of the Mystery Witch School 101 Academy as well. So thank you, everybody, for a wonderful live, and I will see you all again next week. Happy full moon. Enjoy the full moon. Mystery Witch School Academy will be meeting on live over Zoom later today, Australian time, to celebrate the full moon. So for those in the UK and Europe who are part of the school, that's a good time for you. Good time for those in Australia. Not so good for those of you in the US and Canada for the full moon, unless you're real early birds. But the new moon's a good time for you guys. Okay, thank you, and blessed be.